Hello and welcome everyone to the fifth episode of the Analytics India Magazine podcast featuring the members of the AIM Leaders Council. Today we have with us the global AI and analytics leader at Concentrix, Hari Sarvanabhavan.
Hey, Kashyap.
We also have with us Vice President Data Science at Digite, Ashwin Swaroop.
Hey, Kashyap.
We are going to be speaking on a very interesting topic and try to answer the question, is there a need for algorithmic auditing in India, right? Before we start, I would just like to point out that the views stated by the council members are their own and they do not reflect the opinions of their companies. Okay, so let's get started. Hello Hari, hi Ashwin.
Hi.
Hey.
So my first question to you guys, right? Before we go to the importance of algorithmic auditing, what is algorithmic auditing and why is it so important?
So I can start first, right? So, as the world is seeing more and more data coming in, the world also wants technology to play an important role. And algorithms really fit into that space today, right? A lot of decision making that happens has to get standardized. You're looking at mass volumes, going into the decision process. You're looking at things getting into real time, which is what the birth of algorithms actually happened. Now, with this kind of pace, there's obviously another challenge. The challenge is that are these algorithms standardized? Do they have the right kind of transparency? Is there fairness in the algorithms? Are we sure that there are no biases that are being built into the algorithms? These are big questions that people will keep asking. For example, if you apply for a mortgage and you don't get approved, is there a reason that you're not getting approved? Is it just fundamentals or is there something else? So that is one of the reasons why organizations as well as the society at large is asking this question that do we need to audit algorithms? Just like you audit a lot of other things, financial statements as an example, right? They get audited.
Right.
So why shouldn't algorithms get audited?
I mean, to your point, as we are going into the phase where algorithms are coming closer and closer to decision making, right? It's probably makes sense to look at algorithm pipelines as personified, right? That they have responsibilities as well. They have fiduciary responsibilities, legal responsibilities. And there is the common man who's getting affected by these decisions from the algorithm has a right to question why, what was the reason that it decided in this fashion, and not just the common man, but also decision makers, executives, right? So that's the need for executives as well as the common man, wherever the algorithms are interfacing with decisions, right? There is a need to know why the algorithm worked the way it did, and hence algorithmic auditing.
Correct. And I think when you're mentioning several factors and parameters, right, that are getting impacted. So I think we need a multi-pronged approach to when it comes to auditing algorithms. What are some of the evaluation factors or parameters that need to be considered, right? And how do they vary across use cases or sectors?
Right. So for this, it actually helps to borrow from what the FDA does, right? You have in medical devices, you have a classification. You have class 1 medical devices, class 2 medical devices, and class 3 medical devices. And class 3 medical devices being the most sensitive of the lot, right? So for the most sensitive decisions that are being done, right? Case scenarios where you are deciding whether a person's career is going to progress based on algorithms, right? Where it is responsible for doing day-to-day social outcome decisions. Those are very critical, right? For that, the company that is delivering that product has legal and fiduciary responsibility. Those you would define as class 3 algorithms. That's where you set the context, right? Class 2 would be case scenarios where the algorithm itself is not making the decision, but is providing information to the executive in order for him to make the decision. So there for him, explainability is important, right? Because the executive should never be in a position to say, hey, I took this decision because the algorithm said so. No, that's not going to work out. So that's where you classify class 2. And class 1 would be ones where you're automating some kind of business process and it's a machine learning process. So it makes sense to think of this hierarchical or classified system. And then within that, you can add other stuff like legal, fiduciary, ethics, and figure out which one, what intensity you want to get into in terms of algorithmic auditing.
At a broad level, I mean, Ashwin really put it well. At a broad level, I think there are two segments, right? One is technical, which means that the algorithm that you're building, is that the right algorithm, right? Today, unfortunately, most organizations think it's a black box and, it's built within and consider it to be an IP. So the world doesn't really know what the algorithm was doing, right? So that's one part. The other part is really the more social and the ethical aspect, right? Which is not necessarily the technical aspect of what you built out, but are there, for example, biases in the sample that you picked up? If you're looking at historical data, was there a gender bias already in the data? Because that's what the world has always been looking at, right? Things like that are really on the second aspect, right? So I would think both aspects are critical. Do the technical audit and the non-technical, which is the ethical audit or the larger social audit, and that is what the entire process should really entail.
Yeah, I think so. I think we have established the importance of algorithmic auditing, and we also have understood that there are varying levels of attention that are needed for different algorithms. But when it comes to actually auditing the algorithm, what is the expertise needed for a person to audit, or not just a person, but an organization to audit an algorithm? What are the different what are the different resources that are needed for organizations to be able to audit an algorithm?
I think, at least, that it's a multifaceted approach, right? When you're having a formal organization in which you're delivering, at least I can speak from the product point of view, that you're delivering a data science product in which the algorithm itself is, you're selling the product on the basis of the capacity that the algorithm has. Then you need to make sure that you have legal expertise so that the person who's buying it is not buying snake oil, basically, right? In fact, there's a wonderful paper by S. Narayanan from MIT, and he talks about how to identify AI snake oil, right? And he essentially enlists 3 or 4 mechanisms by which you can figure out where AI is not applicable, right? There's certain cases where it doesn't work. So are you safe? And he gives a very good perspective as well, and I would encourage everybody to read it, in which he says that any case scenario where your product is giving a social outcome, right? You had this wonderful case where people were talking about, hey, we'll qualify a candidate based on the video that he has, right? How can you know whether a person is fit for the job based on what he looks like, right? So when people make such kind of claims, you need to make sure that you are able to counteract that, and you have a sufficient amount of legal expertise, technical expertise, and probably even financial to some extent when the time does come, to ensure that the algorithm is doing what's supposed to do and what the organization claims that it will do. Hari, you had something to add?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I think great points, right? A few things that in my mind. One is audits can happen internally. It can also happen externally, right? Organizations can take that call, whether we want to do it internally as a ongoing process, or do you really want to give it to a third party? And today there is, I would say, some sort of mushrooming of third party audit organizations coming as well for AI auditing purposes, right? The second important thing is, a lot of times when you think about audit, you're thinking about output. My view is that you should also think about the input, which means that what goes into building the algorithm also needs to get audited. You can't just look at the output and say, is the output correct? Because that's only half the glass of water, right? The other half, you will really not understand what it is. So that's the second component that's very important. Third is, I also believe that we shouldn't look at audit as policing. You should look at audit in a way where it is constructive for everybody, which means that the team that's really building the algorithm should be part of the process, right?
Correct.
And you could have skills over and above technical skills as part of that. A lot of times, everybody who's there in the analytics and the technology world will know, we just put our heads down. We're just trying to build the right kind of outcomes.
Correct.
It's not that we have biases in our mind. It's just that, that's the way the industry is structured. We probably will need people who understand social impacts much better. Which the developer on the ground doesn't really realize, right? So, like Ashwin said, multifaceted skills over and above technical skills. Maybe psychologists, maybe people who understand social impact, maybe people who understand legal and financial impact are very, very critical for us to have as part of the team. And those are skill sets that you need to keep in the table if you really want to do a thorough audit process. That would be some of my thoughts, Kashyap.
Okay, and so now we have built a team as well, right? Okay, we have people from different expertise coming in together, technical, social aspects, right? What is it that exactly an organization do? So, for instance, if we say we are auditing or or probably certifying a food that can be consumed, we look at what it contains, look at how it is manufactured, processes. What is it exactly that companies who are auditing algorithms need to do when auditing algorithms?
Yes, so in my mind, it's like a normal process, like a project audit that happens. Right from input as to why you're really building this algorithm, what is the outcome that you want to drive, what are the variables that you're looking at, what kind of impacts are you really looking to drive out of this entire project. That needs to get audited. And in my view, what doesn't happen today is a multi-dimensional impact, right? Is there, like Ashwin mentioned, is there a social impact to it? We don't really necessarily think of it when we build the algorithm. But in an audit process, you need to really look at it from that perspective and say, an outside in view, is this going to have a detrimental impact from a social standpoint or a financial standpoint or a legal standpoint? Something that you need to bake into the audit process is what I would think, Kashyap.
To add to Hari's point, right? As you were saying, we get so engrossed in solving the technical problem that we are more worried about accuracy at that juncture.
Correct.
That figuring out what is the source of data, right? Very true of image processing, where you need to figure out, is there bias in the way you're collecting data, right? In case of time series analysis, you do analysis at the end of it, got amazing predictions. But then you look at it and say, okay, is there a stability in the prediction? That you do some kind of perturbation analysis, does it change the prediction so wildly that that algorithm is useless, right? So I think algorithmic auditing may be a misnomer. It's more of algorithmic pipeline, because you're looking at the entire process and not just the algorithm itself, as Hari was saying, right? And once you have that entire pipeline, it gives you a moment to sit back and think about, okay, what are we doing at every step? What is the context that we are trying to solve? And that audit process. And then you may also want to do, when you want to look at the results, you might want to do penetration, adversarial attacks on the system to figure out where it fails, edge cases, right? That moment of thought is what algorithmic processing auditing will help you with, right?
Okay, and then so when you do that, like algorithmic auditing, do you like kind of give them a stamp, or like what is the approval? Because I'll give you an example, right? And there was an organization that audited an algorithm, but it was audited for a certain use case only, and then for the other use cases it was not. So how do you consider holistically ensure that it doesn't have the unintended consequences or impact on the society?
So I would take it back to the context, right? Is it a level? Then coming back to my original analogy, is it a level 3, level 2, or a level 1 algorithm? For a level 1 algorithm, which actually is not performing too much, it's just doing basic automation. Probably you don't need that level of
correct.
You don't need to take that level of emphasis on auditing altogether. Probably you would want to do technical auditing and leave it at that. So having that context is very critical. And once you have that, then the question is, are you using the algorithm as a central basis for your business? So does that mean that the person who's buying that service from you or buying that product from you, is he buying it on the basis of the algorithm you're selling? Is it the model, right? If it is, then yes, you need to go ahead and figure out, okay, what are the other forms in which bias can creep into the entire system, right? Okay. So I think the context is very important. Once you have defined what the context is, then after that, the figuring out what phase or what facet of auditing you want to do comes into picture. How do you want to add something?
No, absolutely. I think completely agree with what Ashwin said. The other important thing is, I don't think there is a silver bullet answer to this.
Correct.
To say, hey, you know what? These are the 5 steps. Just put this here and everything will get resolved. The use cases matter. What is the impact is going to matter? What level of algorithm are you trying to build out? I think matters. It also, to me, it's also important that there is a cultural aspect to it, to say, I'm really going to treat it the way it should be treated, right? See, at the end of the day, all of these things can be interpreted the way you want to interpret it. The example that you gave, somebody can take a narrow use case and say, well, this is audited really well.
Yeah, that's also like, right? How do you holistically...
Exactly, right? So I just think it's going to evolve over a period of time. Yeah. It's something that...
case by case basis.
Correct. And people are just thinking about it. See, honestly, we're just in the world of building algorithms. Yeah. Not everything is an algorithm today, right? There's so much of inflow of algorithms that's happening. This is almost like a parallel view, and to say that, hey, as this is getting built out, let me just make sure that there are the right kind of perimeters to make sure that nothing goes wrong, right? It's an evolution that the industry will really build out.
And we can learn from other industries as well, correct, right? For example, credit rating agencies, for that matter, right? The 2008 financial crisis occurred because the credit rating agencies were in cahoots with the financial system, right? And they did not understand the basis on which they were grading their own financial instruments, right? We are in a similar parallel, because It's important for people who are running the audit system to understand what's happening at the back end, and what is your conflict of interest as well, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so these are other aspects that we need to look at, and we will learn as things evolve.
Yeah, and I just want to give another example, right? So today, the world is so happy with the Olas and the Ubers of the world, right? Everything runs on algorithms. It's all self-serve analytics. But what kind of audit can we really do to say, is the end customer actually getting what he or she wants? And today there's a lot of work that's actually happening in that space. And again, a good classical example where you wanted to meet demand, you actually built a lot of good algorithms to really meet that demand. But are we in a process, or are we in a stage to actually audit all the algorithms that are being built out? Is another big case from an industry perspective, right? So I think this is an evolution.
Yeah.
It will probably take another, in my mind, 3 to 5 years for us to say that, hey, this is gold standard for us to to really adopt across organizations.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have established what talent we need. What do we need to do? We don't have definite answers. It will evolve. The process will evolve. Why would any organization, or why would everyone within the society, right, agree to a particular organization saying that, okay, we have audited this? So who sets the standard is my question, right? Why does a certain XYZ organization get to say that, okay, we have audited algorithms, and why does everyone trust it within the ecosystem? Anyone?
How do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So I think Ashwin already spoke about the FDA, right? FDA is a very good example as to how, one industry really went through this entire cycle. They've got great standards. I'll give you another example. If you look at ASCI, which is the Advertising Standards Council of India, right? Very similar, when you look at an ad, a commercial, you can have multiple interpretations to that. Somebody has to decide there and say, well, no, this is not right, from a brand perspective, they're not saying the right thing or not, right? Similarly, this industry will also come the same way, where people will come together and say, in the larger light of consumerism, we got to protect consumer interests, and we got to make sure that everything that organizations put out, which is part of the decision-making process, needs to get audited. And I think society and industry in general will actually get adapted to it. Today, we don't question an ASCI, we don't question an FDA. I think it's the same set of standards
It's like
that will
a
come
currency, right? Like you don't question a currency.
You're building a social currency, if I may call it that.
Yeah. And my final question, right, to you, while everyone will agree to it, what kind of value addition can people or organizations expect when they get their algorithms audited?
So important thing is that not everybody is an algorithm expert or not an expert in algorithmic pipelines, right? And eventually most products will have algorithms embedded in them, and we're seeing that dominance happen, right? So it's very clear that there's a gap between what the builder or the developer wants to sell in terms of his algorithms and what the industry will consume, because they do not have the understanding of what is being sold. So there is definitely a space for third-party auditing systems to come in and say, hey, take my word, these guys are good and they're doing their job. Of course, it'll take time to build, and that time to build will happen by a lot of communication. So you cannot have one line, as in the use case that you were pointing out, they gave one-line statements. This is really, really good, right? That doesn't work. You need to figure out what is the framework. There are around 200 plus frameworks now, right, for algorithmic pipeline auditing, and the papers are coming in every day, fast. And we have to pick up, eventually the industry will converge to one framework. But then at that juncture, you'll have these guys saying, okay, this is the framework on the basis of which we have said that this guy is fair. And you'll have one line for every stage, that how was the data collection fair, right? Is the data processing and outlier removal fair? So every step of the way will be audited, and you'll have a section saying that, okay, it's covered. And then once the framework is very clear and they're able to communicate these things to the consumers very well, then the consumer gets confidence automatically, and in the end he stops reading the report and says, okay, trust the stamp.
Correct. Yeah. And
It's like-
how do you think the world will come to realize the importance of algorithmic auditing?
So my view is that we might end up having an algorithmic score, right? Just like you're doing a credit score or a risk score, depending on the use case, you might actually get to that kind of a situation. And organizations will go out and say, actually, our algorithmic score is very high or whatever, medium or low. And that itself will become a metric for organizations to say how good or bad they are from an algorithmic perspective. I do want to call out one thing that, there is a black box, there is a white box, there is a gray box. Okay. I do think for the next few years we'll still be in the gray box because everybody understands that audit is important, but I don't think everybody knows what is the best way to make that happen. And we don't have enough people to really sit down and audit as well, right? We might be in the gray for the next few years, but ultimately I think, people will realize that we have to go to the white box from where we are. So I just think it's an industry to evolve, and people will give a lot of value to, to the scores that come out of an algorithm audit.
Hari, to your point, 2022 Jan, there's a paper released called "Scoring the Algorithm That Scores Us."
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Brown et al. And which talks about the broad framework, and it exactly talks about those questions, right? It talks about, eventually it comes to a point where you say nobody can get away with saying, hey, I have a black box model. You have to come out and say, okay, this is what I'm using.
Correct.
And be open about it and say, this is the region of, this is the region where it works, and this is beyond this, it cannot work. And be open upfront about it. Probably idealistic at this juncture.
Correct.
Probably 10 years down the line.
So it's
maybe.
like the humans coming back to the algorithm. That's how it'll actually end up.
Okay. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hari, again for coming.
Thank you so much, Kashyap.
Thank you.
And thank you, Hari, as well.
Absolutely a good, interesting conversation. Futuristic, but I just think that it's a very relevant conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.